In, in today's talk, I'd like to sort of focus on one particular problem involving a computational view of vision. So we've already talked about a little bit one task of vision, which is to determine where the edges of objects are. What we're going to do today is focus on yet another aspect of vision. If you like, it's that you can think of it as a computational problem that our vision system has to figure out, which is not just where the boundaries of objects are, but how far those objects are from us. Now, when you think about it, that's actually a rather difficult task. It's an important task, but because, again, what we're seeing is a collection of three-dimensional elements projected on the 2D surface of the retina, it's, as we've already said, it's mathematically impossible to recover information like distance at least from a single picture like that, from a single eye. We are pretty successful at it, even though it's mathematically impossible. We're pretty successful at it. Imagine, for example, you're walking on a street and there are people and cars and stores and dogs and all kinds of things in your line of vision. You have one way that you have a sense of how far or how close these objects may be to you. You have a number of cues that you're able to use. One being that you already kind of know the sizes of these objects. So if in your field of vision, the human being looks about as tall as the dog, then you have reason to believe that the human being that you're seeing is a good deal further away than the dog is. The dog is closer up, the human is further away, and they look at that, you know, on the surface of the retina, they look to be about the same height. So from that cue alone, you can determine that the human being is probably a good deal further from you than the dog. Other things involve movement. When one object moves in front of another, it occludes or blocks that object. So that's another cue that you can use to say that one object is closer to you than another. What we're going to do is focus on one way in which the human vision system and many animal vision systems are able to determine distances of objects, and that's by the fact that we have two eyes and can use stereoscopic or binocular vision to collect clues about how far objects are from us. The fact that we have two eyes gives us two vantage points on particular objects, and that is one of the things that enables us to determine distance. It's not the only thing that enables us to determine distance, since we know that people who have vision in only one eye are able to see and get around pretty well, and so they don't need binocular vision to make judgments about the distances of objects. They don't absolutely require it. But as so often happens when you're talking about the human vision system, we use every trick that's at our disposal. And you know, since most of us have working binocular vision, that's one of the techniques that we use to determine how far an object is from us. So let's begin with a fairly abstract diagram of what we're talking about when we say a binocular vision system. And there are a lot of labels, there are a lot of little labels on this particular diagram. So let me explain what's going on here. What you're looking at, those two sort of ovals at this level, represent the left eye. You're looking from the top of somebody's head, above the top of somebody's head. And there's their left eye and their right eye, okay? And clearly we've abstracted away a lot of detail here. So both of the eyes are pointed forward. They're just taking in a scene in front of them, okay? What we're now interested in is the distance from us, and when I say us, I mean the plane between the left and right eye. So imagine there's a plane there sitting, that goes through the head and goes through the left and right eye. What we're interested in is the distance of that little blue point that you see at the top from the plane that goes between the left and right eye. Okay, so again, imagine what you're seeing in this diagram is a straight line drawn between the left and right eye, and imagine that coming out and into the plane of the diagram. Okay, that's the plane we're talking about, and we want to know how far that blue dot is from that plane. That distance, which is the thing that we're trying to determine, is labeled D in this diagram, capital D on the right. Now, that line below the left and right eye, that horizontal line, think of that as the line of the retina, the screen of the retina. And again, we're, sort of, just for simplification for this diagram, we're thinking of it just as a continual screen. So you have the left eye and the right eye, and that line of the retina onto which the image is projected, okay? The focal length of the lens of the eye is that distance f that you see at the right. So to sum up so far, we're interested in finding the distance d. We have two eyes, left and right eye, and they are at a distance f from the retina, or they project the focal length of the eye lens is f. So they're projecting onto the retina at a distance f, okay? Now, a few more labels here. If you were to draw a line directly from the blue point straight, perpendicular to the retinal plane, you see that line drawn in the diagram. It would intersect the retina at a particular point, which in this diagram is between the two eyes. The distance from the center of the left eye to that intersection, we've labeled L, script L, in this diagram. And the distance from that point to the right eye, we've labeled R, script R, in this diagram. The distance between the left and right eye, in other words, which here is the sum of L and R, the distance is L plus R equals this thing called B. Now, a couple of things to note here. F, the focal length of the eye, or the focal length of the lens of the eyes, is a constant. So F is not going to change. You can think of F as a known number that always stays the same as we walk around. It's the same number. B, the distance between our two eyes, is likewise a constant. It doesn't change. Well, sure, as we grow up and our head size changes, it changes. But to a very good first approximation, B doesn't change. It's just the same as, it's the same from day to day for us. So B is a constant, F is a constant. Now, we're going to do a little bit of geometry looking at this diagram. And remember, what we're after here is the distance. We want to compute the distance F. We want to compute the distance D, knowing that F and B are constants, okay? So here's what we're going to do. Draw the line from the blue point to where it projects onto the retina. So that line is drawn as a diagonal in this diagram. And similarly, draw the line from the blue point to where it is focused by the right eye on the retina. So you see that we've drawn that as straight lines from the blue line to the retinal plane, through the center of the left eye, and through the center of the right eye. And now we're going to do some geometry that you may remember from high school, okay? We're going to look at similar triangles. And here's the idea. Let's see if, no, I think this is, I was looking to see if there was more on the next slide, but there isn't. Okay, so we're going to look at similar triangles here, and the way what I want you to focus on is the triangle that goes from the blue point. I'll try and draw this. So here's the blue point. Okay. Here is the left eye. Okay. And now we're looking at, this is the retinal distance. Okay, so pick out in the diagram on the right here these lines. It's the line from the blue point through the left eye to the retina here, and the line that projects right onto the retina here. And remember that what we've got here is a distance called alpha, and this distance is called L. Okay? Now, we're going to look at similar triangles here. Okay? Notice that this triangle is similar to this larger, slightly larger triangle. Why? They're both right triangles. These two lines are parallel. Okay, if I draw a horizontal line from the center of the left eye to this line, I've got a line parallel to the retinal line here. So this triangle that I'm outlining with my hand is similar to this triangle that I'm outlining with my hand now. And I want you to look at those two similar triangles on the graph here. So blue point to center of left eye to the interior point of that vertical line. That's a smaller triangle. And blue point to the point on the retina where it projects down to the point between the two eyes where it projects down to. That's the larger right triangle. Those two are similar triangles. What that means is that if this distance here is the one we're looking for, D, right? This distance here is D. So the ratio of D to L, because these are similar triangles, the ratio of D to L is the same as the ratio of D plus F to L plus alpha. So that's just high school geometry right there. The ratio of D to L is the same as the ratio of D plus F to L plus alpha. So let's go to the next slide. And now I've written out the equation that we just found. The ratio D to L is the same as D plus F over L plus alpha. You can do the same observation on the right side of the diagram, and you get D over R is equal to D plus F over R plus beta. I will let you, the rest is left to the reader, right? I'll let you do the algebra to manipulate those first two equations, and what you can derive from them is an equation for D. The equation for D is that third equation written on the graph here. D is equal to F times B over the sum alpha plus beta. Now, what have we got so far? It may just look like we've done a lot of work and we've gotten just some equation with a lot of numbers in it. But there's some very convenient things about this equation. The numerator, F times B, remember, both those numbers are constant. So the numerator, on the right side of the third equation there, that's just a constant. I don't know what number, it depends what units you use and so forth. But once you've calculated it, it's a constant. It's not going to change. The bottom quantity, alpha plus beta, that is, look at the distance alpha on this graph, and then beta on the right side of the graph. The sum of alpha plus beta is called, we give it a name, it's called the disparity. So what we found is that the distance of a point from the plane of the eyes, the distance of a point from the plane of the eyes, is inversely proportional to the disparity. If you have a very large disparity, you have a short distance. If you have a small disparity, you have a large distance. So this is a formula, and it's as a first approximation, this is a computational approach that we can take to using two eyes to determine the distance of an arbitrary point. Given a point out in space, we look at it with our two eyes. We internally note, right, the computational elements of our own vision system, our own internal vision system, note the disparity quantity that can be registered neurologically. So the disparity is registered, and we can make it a good estimate of the distance of that point because we know that the distance is inversely proportional to the disparity. So far, so good. Now, this is as I say, this is a very abstract diagram, and there's a lot of things we're leaving out of it, both for good and ill. In some ways, we can do a lot better than this. I mean, even in simple ways. For example, our eyes don't uniquely point forward. They can focus on a point. They can swivel. So that gives us more information depending on how much our eyes have to turn inwards to focus on a point using the two eyes. We haven't gone into that. We'll just use disparity as an approximation, but notice that given the structure of our eyes, we can even do better than that. Let's go back to the previous slide as well. So we notice, that what we're able to compute something fairly good just from two parallel eyes, that is, eyes facing forward, but we could even do a little better using a slightly more complex computation. And also, this, I should say that this diagram takes into account that the resolution on our retina is not constant. We'd like to, if we really want to focus on a particular point out in space, we'd like that point to project not just anywhere on the retina, but on an area toward the center of the retina, the fovea, which has high resolution. But we won't get into all those details now. If you've ever played with like one of those, not magic eyes, stereoscopic, sort of little toys where you can hold up stereo photographs to your two eyes and see, objects at different distances and so forth. That basically uses this principle of binocular vision. Objects that are meant to look close to you in those stereo photographs have a large disparity. They have a big gap between where they project on the left and right retina. Objects which are further away from you have a smaller disparity. So if you were to sort of look at the objects first with the left lens and then with the right lens, you'd see a bigger jump for objects which have a large disparity than you would for objects that have a small disparity. Okay. Now, there are some things about this. Let's go back to that previous diagram. Sorry, I keep jumping back and forth, but when you look at that third equation, the distance is a constant over the disparity. Um, the way that you might want to think about this, especially as a computer scientist or an engineer, is, okay, that's a pretty useful formula for telling me how far a point is from the plane of the eye. Where might this formula be challenged? What might be the limitations of it? What might be the limitations of implementing it in a mechanical / computational system? What are the, how useful in practice is this equation? One thing that you might note off the bat is we're saying that distance is inversely proportional to disparity. Well, in general, as a heuristic, anytime you see that one quantity is, the quantity of interest is inversely proportional to some other quantity, you start to wonder what happens when things get kind of nasty and that denominator on the right side goes to 0. After all, we only have a certain resolution in our retina. So there's a certain minimum size in practice that the disparity can get. What if it gets really close to 0? Then we're dealing with objects at a very large distance. And what you can say in that situation, given a certain finite resolution of the retina, what you can say is that this equation is going to be much more helpful for us with objects at a short or moderate distance, objects at a moderate distance from ourselves, from the plane of our eyes. When objects get very, very far, we can't really use binocular vision to determine how far they are. And sometimes when objects get really, really far, this kind of algorithm becomes effectively useless. So an example of this is looking at the moon. I mean, the moon is so far away from us that it's hopeless to be able to use binocular vision in our eyes to determine how far the moon is. The moon can't take the role of that blue dot in the diagram that we were looking at before. It's just so far that the d is so large that the disparity involved is extraordinarily tiny and goes way beyond the resolution of our retina, which is perhaps one of the reasons that we sometimes have difficulty judging things like the size of the moon. In fact, I don't know that this is entirely related to this question, but I think it's partially related to this question. There's a sort of famous question in vision, in human vision. You can call it an optical illusion. It's called the moon illusion, which is that we view the moon as being much larger when it's close to the horizon than when it's way over our head at the center of the sky. There are a number of explanations which may collectively have they may not, no one of them may be the single explanation, but there may be several. I have a couple of ideas about this myself. I won't go into it, but for our purposes, you look at that photo, it looks like the moon is huge. And in general, we have this belief, that a very deep belief, that the moon on the horizon is a much bigger object, or it looks much bigger than it is when it's at the center of the sky. That is an illusion. The moon takes up the same real estate on our retina, whether it's on the horizon or whether it's at the center of the sky. But it sparks some questions, some curiosity about why this illusion would happen in the first place. One possibility is that we're using heuristics like, well, we see the moon next to a building, like in this photo. We know that buildings are very large. They're huge. The moon is right next to it, and it looks like it's of a comparable size to that building. So it looks like it's a huge object, perhaps. And since when it's at the center of the sky, there are no nearby large objects to compare it to, it looks comparatively smaller. That's one possibility. As I say, there are others, and people have come up with a number of different explanations for this, and they may, in fact, be complementary. I remember once in graduate school, because I was interested in science education, I was and am interested in science education, and one student came up to me and asked, why is the moon bigger on the horizon than it is at the center of the sky? And I hadn't thought about this illusion at that time. So they asked me that question, and I was like, yeah, so why is it bigger on the horizon than it is at the center of the sky? And I started writing down sketches and suggesting some equations and things like that. And after, I don't know, maybe it was 20 or 30 minutes, I came back and said, it can't be bigger. I mean, it just isn't bigger. I don't see how it could look bigger. It's weird. It does look bigger, but in fact, it really isn't. Take a look at this time-lapse photo. So there's the moon photographed at different positions over the course of one evening. You see it rising in the sky. Same size. So it doesn't change size, but we definitely view it as changing size as it moves upward in the sky. Now, that could speak to one limitation of this binocular vision. Perhaps a more interesting question, though, has to do with, let's go back, I'm going to go back all the way to this diagram. There's an additional simplification of this diagram that we haven't really focused on yet, and that is this whole discussion has focused on determining the distance of a particular element, a blue dot, from the plane of our eyes. That was the way we posed the problem. And in order to solve that problem, we noted where the blue dot projected onto the left retina and where the blue dot projected onto the right retina. And we used those two corresponding projections to determine the distance of the blue dot, to determine the distance of the object. All well and good. Life and the world outside us, however, does not consist of one hovering blue dot sitting at a distance in front of us. It consists of thousands and thousands of visual elements that are projecting simultaneously on the left and right retina. So a crucial problem here, now we have to start thinking, again, this course is called Minds and Machines. Think about what it would mean as a computer programmer to try to make use of this formula. The crucial question, which we've swept under the rug until now, is what's called the correspondence problem. You have 1,000 visual elements projecting onto the left retina, 1,000 visual elements projecting onto the right retina. How do you match up the left retina projections with the right retina projections to make use of this formula? Notice that in order to make use of this formula, you have to know which projected point on the left retina corresponds to which projected point on the right retina. If you can't make that correspondence, if you have 1,000 elements here on the left retina and 1,000 elements here on the right retina, and you don't know which corresponds to which, you could come up with all different sorts of estimates of where objects are out in the universe. So here's an example of what I'm talking about, an experimental example. This is called a random dot stereogram. And it's a fascinating psychological experiment. The idea is they're not identical, but they're very similar patterns of black dots on a white background. If you look at these two squares with a plane, something blocking between your two eyes, or you look at it through one of those stereoscopic toys, okay, what you will see, it may take a little bit, but what you will see is you'll be looking at these two pictures, and suddenly a square, a smaller square toward the center of the two pictures pops out at you. Okay, the reason for that is that a square region within the two different grids here, a little square region has been offset with a particular disparity that is smaller. The particular disparity of these squares is larger than the disparity of the points surrounding them. And since the disparity is larger, we see that little square region is popping out toward us. Okay? So this is you can look up random dot stereograms on the web. You can try them. Put some kind of a page or something between your two eyes so you can only look at the two pictures with two separate eyes. And what you'll see is that you are able to discern a square region that's popping out toward you. How are you doing that? See, that's a really interesting question. In order to do that, in order to achieve that, you have to determine that the black point X on the left retina corresponds to black point X prime on the right retina. And you have to do that correctly for all of the points in these two grids. That seems like a huge computational problem. It is a challenging computational problem, but it's one that our visual systems are able to solve. One of the readings that I am assigning, actually, as accompanying this talk, one of the readings talks about an algorithmic or computational approach to understanding how it is that we can solve the correspondence problem relatively fast. And again, we're talking about computational issues here. We don't just want to be able to solve this correspondence problem eventually. I mean, we don't want to be able to solve it after 3 days of staring at these two grids. We want to be able to solve it hopefully as quickly as possible, maybe within a matter of seconds. Why would that be important to us? Why would it be important to us to be able to look at, highly complex scenes like this and to see the distances of objects within them? Here is a suggestion of why that kind of thing could be interesting to us. So this is a painting called Pintos by the artist Bev Doolittle. Notice that if you were out in the wild actually seeing a scene like this, what would you be seeing? Your left and right eyes would be seeing what looked like more or less random dot stereograms. That is, you have a collection of points and blotches of color on the left eye, points and blotches of color on the right eye. You're looking at the two of them. Some of those points are closer to you than the others and distinguish objects that are actually sitting closer to you. This could be rather important for you to know, depending on the situation. I mean, these are pintos. What if they were predators? What if they were prey? You might be very interested in knowing where the objects are in this scene and in using your binocular vision to determine distances for them. So this is just one aspect of the vision problem. But again, like so much else in the vision problem, we make use of every trick at our disposal to get as much information as we can out of a visual scene.